wow, that's incredible. Why couldn't we do it before? We could have. We
Yeah,
could have.
we just stopped.
There is a whole bunch of content in the enterprise that people shouldn't even know exists.
We're waiting for the industry to catch up to us.
You're talking about the empowerment of the individual over the empowerment of the establishment. Obviously, there's some innovation happening right now in nuclear, in oil and gas. Is there a sense in the industry that somebody's out to eat their lunch right now? Because it's been stated publicly, obviously Tesla, Apple, Google, Amazon have all expressed interest in being in energy.
Mm-hmm.
And why wouldn't they? They recognize this is something we're all willing to pay for. We all value it. It will almost always, like for my lifetime, it will probably cost money, and we'll be happy to pay it. So I can imagine why they would want to get in there. And they're more innovative than your traditional nuclear power plant. Do these industries like oil and gas and nuclear, do they have a sense that somebody's out there trying to eat their lunch and that they have to innovate?
Oil and gas, I think so. I think they also would like to believe that they're never going to go away, but it's inevitable. Something's going to happen, and eventually that's going to kind of fade. There'll be a transition to newer technologies, alternative technologies. In the nuclear sector, what they're exploring now is, and this is actually documented through NASA, there are companies working with NASA right now to develop new styles of reactors, one of which is referred to as a mini reactor. There's micro and mini. It reminds me of the early days of computing. You had mainframes, mini computers, and then PCs, right? Microcomputers.
Microcomputers, sure, yeah.
And so what's happening is there's a co-development or design effort that's going on to develop mini and micro nuclear plants. The idea being that you could have more of these situated throughout the country with a lesser risk than the larger plants that you have now. If something were to happen, it would be much more self-contained and also geographically limiting. The concept of the mini reactor is one that's actually targeted to be used in outer space and to be used on the moon. We keep hearing things about soon we'll see a moon base. And then from the moon base, we'll travel to Mars and wherever else, the energies and forces want us to be.
I can't wait to see it. It sounds awesome. Yeah.
And so NASA actually has a diagram up on their site that shows, this is what it may look like, where you've got this nuclear facility and then the city, so to speak, sprawls out from the center of it. And so definitely, I think the nuclear industry is seeing that it has to make this transition and evolve from what it is now into this new level, which is going to be even more of an interesting challenge, I think, for records managers, because now instead of managing records in one plant, you might be responsible for an entire statewide facility.
Yeah, network of facilities, sure, yeah.
Yep, and that could be hundreds of them, or maybe even thousands of them scattered throughout the state. And so and now we talk about, I used to say there's going to be a universal client. Well, guess what? Yeah, we're in the universe.
Yeah, welcome. Yeah.
And so, when we start establishing colonies in these different planets, you've got the nuclear facilities there, and of course somebody has to manage it, and somebody has to manage the information that's being generated by it. And so now you've got records managers who will not only be terrestrial but extraterrestrial in that sense, that they're going to have to worry about, how do I deal with what's going on in the moon or Mars or Pluto or wherever the case may be.
8-minute ping times to get the information back to the central repository. Like these are real life problems that are, NASA already deals with them, but I mean it's going to come down to commercial entities as well at some point.
Yeah. And the concept is really, I think, a sound one, because when you think about it, many reactors are in use today in the military, nuclear powered submarines, nuclear powered ships. And so to take it from that to putting it into commercial use, I don't see that as, too far off.
Yeah, to me, none of these things seem like a stretch. I agree with you in that the technology is not, it's not science fiction at this point. It is actually running and getting a bloody nose running into the wall of commercial reality. It's like, who's willing to take it on? Are you willing to, the trade-off is, should I just keep doing the safe thing that I'm doing right now until I blockbuster my way out of existence? Or do I transition to this thing that we know is coming, that's going to be expensive, lossy, different, hard, and I'm not going to know what I'm doing, but it's my job as the technology farm team to go and do it. It's, yeah, it'll be interesting to see who has the courage to make those first moves.
Yeah, I think it's, I blame complacency sometimes in people or businesses getting stuck. And it's exactly what you just said. Do I want to take this chance and go into an uncomfortable place? Or do I want to just stay where I am and wait until I retire, and then life is, different and I go traveling, right? And I think that's part of it. And I look at SpaceX as the prime example of this. In the 1950s, science fiction had rockets leaving the Earth and then landing right back down. Perfect landing, standing straight up. And what are they doing now with SpaceX? Exactly that. Right? They launch the rocket, and then that first stage comes right back down so they can reuse it. And folks looked at that and said, well, wow, that's incredible. Why couldn't we do it before? We could have.
We just stopped.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we just stopped doing it. Like, I mean, like looking at all the innovation, obviously the during World War II, post World War II, massive story arc of innovation that just stopped.
Yeah.
Kind of around the time when I was becoming a teenager. I grew up in the space age when I was 2 years old.
Yeah.
Which is sad. The space age is over now somehow, or maybe just being reborn by SpaceX and commercial entities like that. So it is interesting. I agree. We could have kept going with that.
I think it was just the human factor that said, we're doing okay. Let's not take the chance of, hurting what we've accomplished. Yeah. And now you've got somebody like SpaceX comes along and says, no, let's take it to the next level.
Yeah. And we're going to get the next generation of microchips out of that. We're going to get the next generation of human processes that's going to level us up, give us our 100 times increase in technological performance, just because we invested in something that we didn't even know whether or not we were going to get the outcome. It's great. There is no leader in enterprise content management or whatever. Like, Microsoft doesn't pay attention to it. Even though they are the Gartner Magic Quadrant leader, they don't give a shit about records management. OpenText is just too far gone down their income trust route. Like, they're not a software company anymore. They're an acquisition, M&A, whatever you want to call that. I think M-Files and others, they have a handy hammer. Like, we invested, we built our thing, or Highland, now that they bought Alfresco, we built our thing, use our thing, and everybody's exploiting rather than exploring what can be done. And I'm taking it from the perspective of Shinydocs doesn't have to become the SAP of the content services industry, but somebody does. And why aren't we sharing the ideas that get us there? It feels like nobody's really, there's pull for the ideas, but there's no push from the existing vendors. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. And this is having been in the vendor side of things. I think what it is there tends to be this mindset that develops that says, okay, we're the best that we can possibly be. We're going to add some things, but we're up in the top 3, and we've accomplished a lot. So let's keep ourselves there. And if I diversify, if I break from this, then that's going to ruin my brand, right? Because I've got this brand, I've got this recognition over here. IBM, I look at IBM, and sadly, I think that's part of what's happened to them as well, in the sense that, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. And that was a mantra that went on for many, many years. And the same thing with Microsoft. If you buy Microsoft, then you'll never get fired because it's Microsoft. But it doesn't mean that they're really the best fits. And when IBM started to push Watson, the whole idea of Watson, a lot of people looked at it and said they've lost their origin. They've lost their sense of focus. In reality, they didn't, but they just didn't let the world know it. Microsoft, we've got SharePoint, and then SharePoint, and you've got Office 365, and now it's M365. All right, you keep relabeling things. Nobody understands the damn thing that you're talking about. And when you don't teach the world what it is that you actually do in ways that they understand it for them, then it's basically, shows who cares. We've got all the money, we've got the marketing power, and that's that. There was a class that I was in probably about 5 years ago, where they were going to go, everything was moving from, I think it was Highland. I could be wrong on that, but they were moving from their current ECM vendor to SharePoint. And John Mancini, who was the president of AIM at the time, came out with this term digital landfill, right? Where we create these digital landfills with shared drives, and everybody's just dumping stuff in there, and you just buy more storage, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and hope that someday you can find whatever it was you threw in there. This person equated SharePoint to that, only said it's not a landfill, it's a dumpster. My SharePoint implementations become a digital dumpster, and for the same reason, because there was no strategic thought around it, there was no standardization around it, in the sense that basically they put SharePoint in and told everybody you're going to start using SharePoint, clear out your share drives, and put it into SharePoint, and that's where we're going to work from now on. And it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And when we talk about standardization, you have to have it in some level. At some level, you have to have it. I can remember having a conversation with somebody from Microsoft who told me SharePoint does not believe in a foldering. And I went, excuse me?
That's all they have.
I said, you guys are hierarchical storage in the biggest sense, in the sense that you have storage farms, your server farms, and then you have libraries, and then you have, all this stuff. I'm sorry, but that is basically a taxonomic structure. And well, no, we don't need taxonomy. All you need is search. All right, I'm not going to take this any further.
Yeah. Well, I think that they're right. If going back to our conversation, if they had ways of doing all the contextual analytics in building up the semantic connections, because I don't navigate Best Buy. I get straight to what I want through facets and other navigation mechanisms, and it works wonderfully. I would agree with that if SharePoint had any mechanism by which you could reasonably do that, but they don't. So I think it's an aspirational comment that they made more than a factual one.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, he was trying to convince me that they were a flat storage system, and I went, no.
Okay. Yeah.
If that's what you think flat is, then all right.
Yeah, exactly. I'll leave you with one last thing to think about. Is maybe you could help us with this, or think about it. And David Sliman is working on this right now. It might be a name that you're familiar with. He ran customer service at OpenText, working for James McGurley for a number of years. And so he's with us now as a product manager. And he's taking on the task of actually building what content services, like a Wave or a Gartner Magic Quadrant, should actually measure.
Mm-hmm.
We're throwing out ideas of, do you have 90% or more penetration of information governance for 90% or more of your content, eligible content? So that means your shared drives and your SharePoints and your email and your desktops and people's portable devices. Do you have 90% of the documents or more? First of all, do you know where all your documents are to begin with? And then do you
Right.
know what they are? That's threshold number one. And the nice thing that, of course, self-serving that we like about that is we're one of the only companies in the world that have that level of knowledge that's been done automated. There's been lots of companies who've done it manually, like
Mm-hmm.
lots of healthcare, pharmaceutical, and all that because of FDA compliance. The controlled nuclear information that we have at Bruce Power, for sure they have it, but for all their human resources records or whatever, total fail.
Yep.
So what would you think about that if you could forget what Gartner or whatever says right now, but if you could actually say, this is how vendors should be judged, is do you go across all the systems? Do you actually model the information in a way to actually make it governable? Do you
Mm-hmm.
make it available to the right people at the right time? And of course, it implies the data enrichment, the context analysis, and it might even go as far as the process, identifying how people are using it. How would you model it? What metrics would you put in place to be a leader in that industry?
That is a tough one. I believe IDC tried this.
Okay.
So Ron Glass, who used to be with IDC, had tried this probably about 8 years ago. And it was extremely tough because in his mind, and he and I had talked about it several times, it was basically the four, what I refer to as the four pillars, the people, process, information, and technologies to understand it all. As you said, do you have 90%? Do you provide 90%? One of the biggest challenges was many companies had no idea what the 95% represented. Was it in a system, or is it across every device in my enterprise, including smartphones, iPads?
Yep.
And so without and this gets back to our conversation about context.
Yeah.
When we say, do you have the 90%? Nobody was defining what that really meant. Mm-hmm. And so it became near impossible to get people to, truly come back and say, no, yeah. I don't have that, because nobody wanted to admit it.
Totally. And I mean, the intention is not to throw anybody under the bus, but to welcome the next generation of organizations that are going to solve this problem. Mm-hmm. This is not, like I say, and I don't mean to be mean to Microsoft or others. They're great at what they do. I got OneDrive installed right here. It's fine. But it's not solving my information governance problem.
No.
There's the player who wins that will go, yeah. If there's possibly a record on Bob's iPad, we know about it. If there's one in his email outbox, we know about it. Like, what do you mean? How come was that hard before? Like, I mean, or was that a not common knowledge before? That's the level of incredulity I think that we should have in the future when we look back at records management and go, what do you mean you didn't know where your information was?
Yep.
Yeah. And we're not even anywhere near that as an industry or anything.
No. Right? And I've scared many CIOs and COOs when we talked about things like e-discovery. And, one of the first things I'll ask is, you got a Salesforce? Yep. Do you know what tools they're using in relation to sharing information with their customers? Well, they're supposed to be doing this. I didn't ask what they were supposed to be doing.
Sure.
I asked, do you know what they actually are using? And I would say probably 85% of them came back and said, no, I haven't got a clue. I can assume that they're using the approved tool, but I can't assume that they're doing it 100%. And when they start digging into it, they find out that things like Dropbox, Drop,
Sure.
all of these tools were being used In fact, there was one guy that was actually giving access to his network share drive. And it was like, are you kidding me? He's coming into your enterprise, your ecosystem, and you have no idea that this was happening. What about the use of USB drives? Thumb drives. Well, they're not supposed to do that. That's not what I asked. Do you know if they're using those to share information? And the answer was no. And so this is a big problem. It's a huge problem. And again, this is why that particular survey was so difficult, was because nobody wanted to admit they had no idea what what reality was, as opposed to what the ideal situation should be.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bob. This is, I'm talking to Bob Larrivee, independent analyst, Futurist, board member, Nuclear Information and Records Management Association, the most recently recognized as one of the top 50 global thought leaders and influencers on privacy for 2020. Thanks a lot for talking to me today, Bob. This was fantastic.
Oh, thank you, Jason. I really enjoyed it, and welcome the opportunity again sometime.